We're back now with our All-Star Roundtable, Carly Fiorina, Bob McTeer, Bill Galston, and Stephen Lieb. Thanks for staying with us. Want to talk more about the economic challenges facing the country and Barack Obama's ideas for dealing with them. Carly Fiorina, $825 billion in stimulus, a mix of spending as well as taxes. What do you make of that? Is it going to work?
Well, you know, the problem is that while Barack Obama declared today that everything will be different going forward, the reality is it won't be different. Ben Bernanke is still in the chair. Tim Geithner, who has been involved over the last many months, will continue to be involved now as Treasury Secretary. There has been a great deal of bipartisan support thus far in making the moves that have been made thus far, and those moves are, in fact, bold, decisive, and unprecedented. And so what we have, I think, is the prospect, in part, of improving what has already been done. In other words, Larry Summers, as we know, has talked about the need for more transparency and accountability in how TARP money is spent and how banks use the money. But the fundamental problems remain, and in my mind, those are three. First, as your other guests have said, the banking system is near collapse and credit is not flowing. And until we deal with that, we are going to continue to have massive problems with or without major government stimulus. Second, consumers aren't spending, and consumers represent 2/3 of the purchasing power in this country today. And finally, small businesses aren't moving, and small businesses produce about 2/3 of the jobs. And, of course, there's the home foreclosure problem, which continues. So those fundamentals have to get fixed and have to get moving. And I, for one, believe that a large government stimulus package can be helpful, but it doesn't address those four things fundamentally.
Stephen Lieb, do you disagree with that in any way?
I do. I think that things are going to be different. I think what you heard this weekend from Larry Summers is that much of the remaining TARP money is going to go to consumers rather than banks, that banks are going to be held to a high level of accountability. And whereas I think the financial crisis is utterly serious, I do think it's curable. It's curable with money, and it's curable with money spent in the right way. And I'm confident that we'll do that. The other crisis, which no one's really talking about right now, but Obama did mention it today, and I was very, very happy that he did, is the energy crisis, the resource crisis. If you go back to July of this year, even early August, the decision that the Fed was debating was whether or not to raise interest rates because inflation was so high. Now we're about 4 or 5 months away from that, and we have another kind of crisis, but the resource crisis has not gone away. Once we get this world's economy growing again, we're going to have a lot of trouble funding that growth unless we have plans for developing alternative energies. So I think that has to be way up there. And again, I was very, very happy that I almost said President-elect, but now President Obama
We're all getting
really
used to
did
that.
highlight that.
Bill Galston, let me get you in on this discussion here. You've seen the stimulus package, the numbers here, $825 billion. There's about to be a pretty hearty debate in Congress as to what should be in that package, but there doesn't seem to be much debate that something big has to pass.
No, there isn't much debate, and I'm convinced that something big will pass. I don't think the Republicans in Congress really have the stomach for a fight over the stimulus package as the first item of business. And there'll be some nips and tucks. Clearly, the Democrats are pulling against tax cuts and in favor of increased direct spending. The Republicans are pulling in the opposite direction. But there will be an agreement, and there will be an agreement quickly. What worries...
Is it going to be bigger than $800 billion?
I doubt that it's going to get any smaller, let me put it that way. And history suggests it's a lot easier to add than it is to subtract. So probably yes, but it's not going to be $1 trillion because I think it's very clear that the American people would get sticker shock at $1 trillion. But the crux of the matter, in my judgment, is the banking system. And what really worries me is the memory of what happened to Japan. They had what is called a lost decade because they failed to fix their banking system after the real estate collapse in the late 80s and early 90s. And as a result, they tolerated toxic assets on the balance sheets of their banks for a decade, and the economy did not grow.
And Bob McTeer, are you worried about the same thing? We've already spent $350 billion in TARP money. There's another $350 on the way. Is that enough to recapitalize the banking system, to get these toxic assets off the balance sheets?
Well, people are now talking about just putting more restrictions on the banks. No, they need They need to get toxic assets off the balance sheet. They need capital. And I was teasing a while ago when I said I hoped he'd mention mark-to-market accounting, but that's the only low-hanging fruit that I think needs to be tried. And Paul Volcker, I think, renewed the debate a couple of days ago on that issue. A lot of these losses and a lot of this decline in regulatory capital in the banking system are based on accounting rules that are very unrealistic. They're based on having to write down assets to near zero that banks would be able to hold on their balance sheet until they recover or mature. And the accountants won't give on that. I don't know why the government, though, doesn't do something about it.
All right. Well, listen, I'd like to get the rest of our panelists' take on that issue of mark-to-market accounting, whether it's time to reassess that under the Obama administration. We're going to continue our conversation here with our guests in just a moment. Again, you're watching Bloomberg special coverage of Inauguration Day here in America. You're watching Money in Politics. Stick around. Much more still ahead. We're back with our roundtable talking about the challenges he faces as he takes the reins of power, specifically the problems in the financial sector. We've been hearing from Bob McTeer this idea again about perhaps we need to reassess mark-to-market accounting, fair value accounting. It's been very controversial, been suggestions that maybe the SEC should revisit it, should allow some changes here. And Carly Fiorina, what do you make of that idea? You worked in the corporate sector. You had to deal with these accountants. Is that the right thing to do right now?
Well, I do think it's the right idea, and I've actually been saying that now for almost 2 years. Mark-to-market accounting itself was enacted during a crisis. I think as a CEO, as a current board member, as someone who studies these issues, as do your other panelists, I think there are some upsides to mark-to-market, but we are now living through the downsides. And I think it's an example of a new idea that should be considered. I was not in my previous comments trying to indicate that a large government stimulus program isn't necessary. I think it is, but it's not sufficient. There are other things that are going to happen, and mark-to-market accounting and re-examining that is one of those things, in my view.
Well, Carly, let me follow up on that, because we've had this debate here on this show in the past couple weeks and months. There are those out there say if you alter the accounting rules right now, and the SEC's already looked into this, you raise the possibility that people have even less confidence in the value of some of those assets. Isn't that a reasonable concern? Couldn't you make the situation even worse?